Okay, well, thanks very much for the invitation. This is my first time being involved with the instructor series and really being engaged with CITL, but I think we are really fortunate here at Memorial to have an organization like CITL just to provide extra resources and a stimulating discussion of how to advance teaching and move things forward in our practice of teaching. So today I'm going to talk about what I call TikTok projects, which are just basically a form of video presentation. And this is the example is going to be how I use this in my physical oceanography class. So I'm an assistant professor. I've been here. This is my fourth September or my fourth fall semester in the Department of Physics and Physical Oceanography. I mostly teach physical oceanography courses, and so I'm sort of coming from that perspective. Okay. So I'm just going to start off sort of with a broad look at the way in which we communicate science. And so the different modes of scientific communication. And so, um, as instructors at the university, many of us have active research programs as well. And we're very familiar with the classical modes of scientific communication, which is for us is mainly journal articles or maybe books or monographs oral presentations like technical talks at conferences, but then also we often give public presentations. And then to some degree, we might be involved in things like interviews on radio or television, documentaries, if we're lucky. But then these are sort of classical modes that are still very important today. But there are also a number of new modes of communication that are of varying degrees of newness, but I call them social media enabled modes. And so these are modern ways of communicating science that essentially use the internet and social media. And so these include things like YouTube. So I'm counting YouTube as social media for the purpose of this talk. And that can come in the form of long form YouTube videos. I'm going to show a few examples. Also short form like YouTube Reels or Shorts or short videos on TikTok and Instagram. And then also sort of recently there's been an explosion of interest in another form of sort of social media, which is is podcasts. And so often these long form unstructured interviews with scientists are also quite popular. I'm just showing an example on the right hand side. This is to set some context. So probably many of us have seen the movie An Inconvenient Truth. So this was a documentary about climate change that was put together by U.S. presidential election popular vote winner Al Gore. And this was called one of the most influential or most important films of our time. And just for some context, the total viewership numbers. So I did a little bit of research, ChatGPT, Googling around to try to get viewership numbers. And the total amount of people globally that have seen An Inconvenient Truth, again, one of the most important films, climate change, presidential candidate, was about 30 million. And so we're going to come back to that number. But I want to point out that through their undergraduate education, students generally get a good amount of training in some of these modes of communication, but very little in others. And so the top few that I'm pointing at here, like journal article, written forms of communication, oral presentations, term papers, in-class presentations, things like that are very commonly used to train those skills, and it's very important to develop those skills. But the relatively newer social media enabled modes are largely not taught. And so certainly when I went through, I did my undergraduate degree here at MUN in the physics department, and I certainly received no training at that time. Now that was earlier, so social media wasn't as evolved. But in general, we give lots of term papers, we give lots of in-class presentations. But things like how to communicate information in short form, or even in very long form, like interviews or that sort of thing, is really not focused on. And so what I'm talking about here is a way to sort of open up a new avenue into that mode of scientific communication in the undergraduate curriculum. Okay, so let's compare the reach of these various things. So why should we care about the social media? We have other classical ways of communicating. And I'm going to argue that reach, and so the ability to mass communicate and get your message out and get scientific education and literacy and awareness out to large audiences is really the thing that makes social media enabled communication very attractive. So in comparing and contrasting here, at the top, the popular classical modes of communication like magazines and that sort of thing. So the most popular mainstream written scientific publications that go to a large audience today are National Geographic is the first by far. That has a readership of about 50 million. So it's comparable to the Al Gore movie, about 30 million. Scientific American is down by a factor of five, about 10 million. And then TV shows like Cosmos, here showing Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's the host of that show, have about 10 million viewership for, say, a given episode or a given article, that sort of thing. So let's compare that to social media enabled modes. So I'm going to show a few examples of this. But if we look on YouTube, we look at various different categories. So say a long form YouTube video, so a bit longer, maybe 10 minutes, longer than 10 minutes. The top one on YouTube I looked up, and it's called Gravity Visualized. I'm actually going to show a clip of that video next. And that has about 140 million views, so triple the viewership of any National Geographic article. And then we go to short form YouTube videos like or Instagram Reels or TikToks. And then there's a very quick one. I'm going to show the whole video in a couple of slides about essentially angular momentum conservation. And that one is a 30-second video and has 300 million views. So if you can say something simple and get an interesting, exciting scientific point across in a short amount of time, you can reach an incredibly large audience. But even if you have a very long message, there's actually room for that too. Joe Rogan, controversial guy, but he has a podcast and he has an episode where he talks to Neil deGrasse Tyson, the host of Cosmos. And even though that's a 3.5 hour long interview, so it's an enormous time commitment, it has 40 million views on YouTube. So these social media enabled modes offer tremendous amount of reach. And across various forms. And so this is sort of my argument why we should pay attention to these. And I'll say, of course, reach is absolutely not everything. And then the quality of the message that you're able to communicate, the quality of the teaching that goes on, the ability to have a back and forth exchange, those all differ between different modes of communication. But what I'm arguing is that because the reach is so enormous for social media enabled communication, we can't really responsibly ignore that. We have to at least think about how we can take advantage of those modes because of the unmatched mass communication potential. And so I'm arguing that students need or should get some kind of training. I'm not saying that it should take the place of classical term papers or things like that, but we should place some new emphasis on how to train students for communicating in this new era of scientific communication. So I'm just going to show a couple of examples because the next part of the discussion is about what do these successful videos look like? So if we're trying to make social media enabled science communication, what are the properties of specific videos that get large amounts of views and can do mass communication? So this first one, so this is the most viewed, relatively long YouTube video on physics. So it's about, 10 minutes or so long and has 140 million views. So I'm just going to show a clip of that. So here we go. So this is it's a discussion of gravity. So what they're doing is that they're using this rubber sheet and it's supposed to reflect like the idea that space or gravity is the bending of space-time. So I'll just play a little clip of it.
Kind of wobble around a point 3/4 of the way from the center of the Earth. We usually don't account for that when we're looking at satellite motion. Well, instead of just letting go of one, what if I give it a sideways push? Now it orbits. Now it's losing energy, which wouldn't happen in the solar system, right? Not noticeably. There's some perturbations from other planets and things, but this one does lose energy and spirals in. If I don't push it as hard, it will do an ellipse for a while anyway.
Okay, so that's all I want to show from that one. But the idea here is that that instead of space-time bending, they have this rubber sheet and they have a weight on that sheet. And just in a short amount of time, by throwing some marbles around on the sheet, he's illustrating how geometrical effects, the bending of the sheet, can cause orbital dynamics, just like happens in the solar system. And it also gets into sort of more subtle insights into the physics in that the way that you throw the marble or the way that the trajectory is initialized determines whether that orbit is circular or elliptical. And so this simple demonstration actually captures a lot of physics, and obviously it's been many people have been interested in this. The next one is even more spectacular. So this is I'm going to show the whole video here. So this is about angular momentum conservation. This is the highest hits, 300 million views on YouTube of the short form. So it's a 30-second video. So let's take a look. You have a very, very energetic
Like this, and I let it go. What will happen? It will. Why? Gravity. Boring. We start spinning it. Ready? Face. No. What's happening? What's happening? It's a gyroscope now. It is spinning and it is precessing like our planet Earth. If I hold.
And so very, very short. And I think it was actually edited maybe a longer sequence to make it shorter. And just it's a classic demonstration of a spinning bicycle wheel. It has to do with angular momentum conservation. And able to reach a huge audience and get across a simple message. Okay, so what do these things look like? So these popular social media science communications, what do they sort of look like in general? So we just saw two examples, and I tried to sort of look at a few and come up with some basic ideas as to what are their unifying characteristics. And so what I've noticed is that generally shorter communications videos tends to have more reach. And so our YouTube video that's long form had 140 million views. The short form 30-second one had 300. And that just kind of makes sense. You know, if you're consuming some science content, having a less time commitment is more attractive. Generally, you know, I looked at physics, and so generally physics has lots of equations, but these popular science demonstrations very, very often have very few or no equations, and if there are equations, they're very simple. And instead of equations, it rely a lot on visualizations and demonstrations, and that are based on sort of analogy, physical intuition, and relationships between things that students or viewers already know, rather than making sort of a detailed step-by-step logical argument. And so it's about sort of using your sort of visual part of your brain to understand physics, rather than sort of step-by-step mathematical or logical arguments. And as you can see, you know, if we're thinking about how to do some of these things ourselves, one thing that's clear from these couple of videos is that nothing needs to be technologically fancy. The first one was just a rubber sheet and some marbles. The second one is a bike wheel and a standard first year or high school demonstration. Something else that might be harder to capture that I also have noticed is that there's generally a person on screen. So usually there's a human being doing the instruction or doing the demonstration. And I think people just connect a lot better when there's a person that they can see and look at their body language and facial expression and sort of see their energy. That person's usually very excited or enthusiastic in their own way. I think those two presenters were very different. They both brought enthusiasm, but very different expressions of that. There's energy and humor involved, and an essential aspect seems to be that there's dynamics. And so we're not just looking at, say, two masses being balanced or something static like that, but there's dynamics and motion and change happening. And a very special example of this, there's a great interview on YouTube. This is a still frame from it, of Richard Feynman, the former Nobel Prize winner in physics, who was involved a lot in quantum mechanics, just discussing physics in general in this interview called Fun to Imagine. So it's a 1 hour long interview, has 5 million views on YouTube. I can't recommend it enough. Very, very interesting. And just like, you know, if you just look at this guy, you can see you look at his facial expression. He's got this smirk. You see this energy and the humor. You can see he's making motions with his hands to get that dynamic energy. And he really embodies these factors. And this particular interview is very, very exceptional, because he's actually able to evoke all sorts of things about physics. And rather than use visualizations and experiments, the theme of it is fun to imagine. And so the idea is that he's using thought experiments and getting you to imagine and think about how things would happen in your sort of mental laboratory. And Feynman is such a special person that he managed to pull that off quite well. Okay, so the idea, so I think I've tried to make the argument that social media enabled communication has massive reach, that students are not typically trained in those modes of communication. And so I came up with, actually, I was actually given this idea by a former professor in the physics department, James Monroe, who was also an oceanographer. And right when I started my position here, he suggested, a lot of students get term papers. What if you tried a TikTok or a video project? And I think that was kind of just an offhand comment, but I thought it was a really, really good idea. And so I started to work on it and build it into something that's actually implemented in the course. And I implemented this the second time I taught this course. And so for some context, so the course where has been tried out is called Physics or Ocean Sciences 2300, which is Introduction to Physical Oceanography. So this is a course that's either required or it's one option out of two options for the ocean science major. It's an elective for physics students. The mathematical content of the course is algebra based, so there's no calculus. There's also no lab component, so it's sort of a straight up and down lecture course. Generally speaking, we have 30 or 40 students. It's down a little this year. I think many of the enrollments are down, but generally, that 30 to 40 range. And about half the students come from the ocean sciences side, where a lot of the interest is in biological aspects of oceanography. And then about half the students come from the physics side, who are more interested in the forces and the currents and winds and things like that. How this fits into the grading is I've made the TikTok project worth about 10%. So the way that I grade the course is that the majority of the marks come from tests and exams. So combining the midterms and the final is 65% of the total grade. I have 5 assignments worth 25%, and then the last 10% is the TikTok project. And I'll return to this idea of drafts, but the way that I've decided to structure the project is that the students do a first draft of their video, they get feedback on that first draft, and then they present a final draft. And then at the end of the course, something that I've had fun doing is we sort of get the students together on the last day of class for sort of a mandatory attendance, mandatory fun sort of situation, and have some pizza and watch as many of the TikToks as we can. Okay, so what is the project? So this is just an overview of the project description that I give to the students. And so what the students are asked to do is it's essentially much like as you would for a term paper, it's a exercise in exploring the primary literature. So the published journal articles in the technical literature, so in journals like Nature, Nature Climate Change. In my course, Journal of Physical Oceanography is very popular, as is the Journal of Climate. And there's lots of other related journals, atmospheric science journals, glaciology journals that are all relevant. And so I give the students kind of a very wide swath of what they can talk about. Basically, they choose any paper in any one of these journals or the journal of their own choosing that's related to physical oceanography in some way. And so many students, for example, coming from ocean sciences might choose one that has a biological angle also, or some students that may be doing earth science choose one with a geological angle. So they choose their paper. So it was based on a single journal article. And what they want to do is prepare a video that's supposed to be between 2 and 4 minutes, keeping into that short form TikTok, YouTube shorts kind of range, that addresses 7 key questions that I give them explicitly. And so these questions are: what is the study about? So what's the general topic? What's the motivation? So what's the reason why the authors chose to do that work? What were the general methods? So was it satellite data? Was it a numerical model? Was it in situ observations? These are oceanography examples. What's new and exciting? So what did this paper do that built on previous work and makes it a new contribution? Key conclusions, like what was the final outcome or the main results of their work? Then the impact and significance. So what is the relationship between the results of that work and other things, like say the broad climate in general, or the health of ocean ecosystems, or any human impacts, for example. And then just as a brief one that they sort of just touch on is: why did they pick this particular study? Why did they find it personally interesting? And many students say things like they're interested in climate change, or they're interested in the ocean ecosystem, or what have you. So the requirements for the video. So those are the general questions that they have to have in mind. They try to answer through their video. But then there are also sort of technical requirements. So the video has to include, or the students would lose marks, for example, the authorship information of the paper. So that is proper scholarship, so that we're attributing the work to the people that actually did the work. I require that they take at least 2 of the figures or diagrams from their chosen paper, and then explain what those figures show. And this is really the meat of the topic, of the work, rather, of the project. That you look at some of the key results figures, interpret those figures, and then use those as a visual aid to explain what was the main point of the study and what were the results. Um, Many students ask the question, do they have to appear in the video? That's understandable because not everybody wants to be appear on screen or um, be up in front of people. And so I make the point that appearing in the video is not mandatory, although I always encourage the students that they should consider doing so, because if you look at all of the most popular social media science communications, there's always some presenter. And then just reading off their energy and their body language always makes a difference. But I don't want to demand that the students do that, so that's optional. And then beyond that, really the structure and style and how you want to approach this, if it answers these questions in the blue part, and it includes the two figures, and includes the authorship information, and includes an explanation, you can do it however you want. You can stage this as a homemade experiment. You can stage it as a talking to the camera. You can do a conversation. And I'll show some examples where different students approach it different ways. And I think the flexibility of the structure is something that allows the students to have fun with the project and sort of combine their scientific training with sort of personal expression and creativity. And I mentioned this previously, but so we do it in two drafts. So typically how the timing works out is that the students submit their first draft in late October. So I'm teaching this course in the semester, and the students just in this past week submitted their first draft. A typical problem, if anyone is thinking to take this and run with it in their own courses, the first drafts are almost universally too long. There's this famous quote, if I'd had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter. That really applies here, that getting a concise and pithy, but not overly dense description that contains all these different questions and ideas is challenging for the students, and very often they come way over significantly too long in the first draft, but then I help them decide what's some material that's maybe peripheral or could be cut in the feedback section. So I give the students individual feedback, they revise their video, and then just a few days before the end of the term, they submit the final version. Okay, so I'm just going to show an example. So this is a student who gave her permission to show her video. And this one is called the Doomsday Glacier. So it's the combination of glaciology and physical oceanography. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show the first draft that she submitted, then the feedback process, the feedback that I provided, and some sort of analysis of the video, and then we'll show the final product, and then I have one more fun example after that. So we'll play the video here now. Okay.
This is what scientists are calling the Doomsday Glacier. The Thwaites Glacier in the South Pole is melting significantly fast relative to other Arctic glaciers. It loses about 50 billion tons of ice each year and contributes about 4% to the global sea level rise. If this entire glacier were to melt or collapse, it would rise the sea level by a staggering 25 inches. In an article published by Nature called The Heterogeneous Melting Near the Thwaites Glacier Grounding Line, a team of researchers and scientists aim to understand the mysterious melting patterns on the underbelly of the Thwaites Glacier. Specifically, they are looking at the grounding line, which is the transition point between the grounded glacier and the floating ice sheet. To achieve their goal, they drilled a borehole through 0.5 kilometers of ice, reaching 2 kilometers seaward of the grounding line. They also deployed an AUV named IceFin, which took them to the underbelly of the glacier and provided a unique perspective on the melting process. Most observations of the Thwaites Glacier have been from radar or satellite, which only provide a limited view of what's underneath the glacier. The borehole data revealed a complex underside with ridges and crevices. Surprisingly, the fastest melting occurred along the steep ice crevices, where turbulence and heat transfer play a crucial role. In contrast, flat regions have lower melting points due to poor freshwater mixing and low currents. They found the melting of the steep ice surface to create layers or stratification on the ice. This stratification plays a role in diminishing the melting rates on the flat surfaces. Currents were also faster in the crevices by up to a factor of 2 compared to the background. With these new insights, researchers are estimating a new average annual melt rate of 5 meters per year. And estimated melt rates along the vertical surfaces can reach as high as 30 meters per year. In the surveyed region, approximately 27% of melting takes place on slopes exceeding a 30-degree incline. since crevices serve as funnels for water flow, efficiently transmitting both heat and salt into deep crevice walls. These heightened rates of melting in specific areas are expected to expand crevices and basal rifts throughout the glacier. This in turn could lead to an enhanced likelihood of glacial collapse. This study should captivate us all because it addresses an issue that affects us all collectively. The melting of massive glaciers, such as the Thwaites Glacier, poses a real threat on sea level rise and in turn poses a threat on the Earth system.
Okay, so this was a very, very well done project. And so the idea here of this particular study was that they went down, just went by pretty fast. So they went down to Thwaites Glacier down in Antarctica, and were assessing how much melting was going on the underside of the glacier. And what they found was that it had a lot to do with geometry. So so there are places on the underside of the glacier where the underside is fairly flat, and those have fairly low melting rates. And then there are also points where the glacier bottom juts down almost vertically into the water, and then you have higher melting rates, and they associate that with various physical factors like melting and generation of salinity layers and stratification. Okay, so here were my comments. And so these are typos included. I just copy and pasted this from the original feedback. And so this student made the creative choice to put some music in the background, which I thought was a pretty cool touch, and a lot of popular videos do that, but the music was a little bit loud. Some of the units I suggested to convert into SI Canadian units, meters and centimeters rather than inches. Some positive feedback or encouragement that the introduction, I think, laid things out really well, and then some questions. And so the key, I would say, thing that could be improved with this first draft is actually the technical explanation of the figures. In particular, I've shown two figures here that this student references. And the figures go by fairly quickly. And although sort of if you have time and you sort of look at the figures after the fact, you can interpret what they mean. Essentially, these figures are not explained in too much detail. And so in the feedback, I said, you didn't really explain in enough detail this figure with ice base on the y-axis. And maybe even this figure has a lot of information in it. We have color, we have a complicated form that's actually representing the base of the glacier. And so we suggested maybe refocusing on a smaller number of key aspects, or using different figures, or doubling down a little bit and putting in some more explanation of these figures. And something else I mentioned was that actually it went by, the student could not have been aware of this, but one of the authors on the study, David Holland, actually has some of his education from MUN, and I thought that was pretty cool because this is a big international study, and it would be interesting to highlight that we produce great people from this institution that go on and do exciting work. So how long did this take? So whenever we're planning out evaluations and teaching tools, the workload that goes on the instructor is part of the consideration. And so I estimate that, roughly speaking, I probably watched the video twice. The video in this case, this student actually was very good, and had the first draft video was just slightly over 2 minutes, so very, very appropriate length. So watching that twice is maybe 5 or 6 minutes, and then probably about twice that to write some commentary. So maybe in total about 15 minutes to evaluate one project. Okay, and so now I'm just going to show. So this student took this feedback into consideration and then produced the final version, which is quite similar, but I'm just going to show it just to show the whole process. So we'll take a look at how it turned out in the end. This is the final version.
This is what scientists are calling the Doomsday Glacier. The Thwaites Glacier, located in the South Pole, is disintegrating fast. It loses approximately 50 billion tons of ice each year and contributes to about 4% of the global sea level rise. If the entire glacier were to melt or collapse, it would raise sea levels by a staggering 64 centimeters. In this article published by Nature in 2022, a group of researchers and scientists aim to understand the mysterious patterns of melting on the Thwaites Glacier grounding line. The grounding line is located on the underside of the glacier and is the transition point between the grounded glacier and the floating ice shelf. They drilled a borehole through 0.5 kilometers of sea ice 2 kilometers seaward of the grounding line. They also deployed an AUV named IceFin, which was able to record videos, take photos, as well as record data about the salinity, temperature, and ocean currents. IceFin's data revealed a complex underside of staircase-like ridges and crevices traveling through the whole underside of the ice shelf. The fastest melting occurred along the steep ice crevices where water is able to flow through easily, carrying heat and salinity. Currents were also faster by a factor of 2 in the steep regions. They found the melting on steep surfaces to create layers or stratification of fresh water. This in turn helps to prevent or reduce the melting of the flat surfaces. As the ice shelf melts, it creates more distance between the seafloor and the grounding line. If the ice shelf were to completely melt, the glacier would be extremely susceptible to collapsing. Researchers are estimating a new annual melt rate of 5 meters per year. They base this on the ratio of seawater to glacial meltwater. But the estimated melt rates along the steep ice crevices can reach up to 30 meters per year. In the surveyed region, approximately 27% of the overall melting takes place in areas where the slope exceeds a 30-degree incline. And scientists are estimating that this entire glacier could collapse within the next 5 to 10 years. This study should captivate us all because it is an issue that affects us all collectively. The melting of massive glaciers such as the Thwaites Glacier pose a real threat on sea level rise, which in turn pose a threat on the entire ocean system.
So I was very impressed with the student. You can see that they incorporated some of the feedback. Some of the plots that were not as explained in as much detail were removed. Extra detail was added about the Munn connection. Extra detail was added about how the measurements were actually made. That the meltwater was assessed, or the melting rate was assessed by looking at the mixing of meltwater and seawater under the glacier. And also, she incorporated some new figures, some new schematics from the paper that showed this cool staircase structure that develops on the underside of these glaciers, which is all very interesting. And so this, I'd say, is a great example of very, very well done project that had the right scope, focused on a specific problem, very obviously important, made the connections to why it's important, but was a fairly traditional approach. So this student was sort of speaking to the camera and then talking about the scientific visualizations that she was discussing. And so I'm going to show one more example, and this one it's a little bit longer because the first draft of the second video came in at 5 minutes or so. I'm not going to show the whole thing, just the first part. But the second one shows sort of the different directions that you can take with this kind of project and express your creativity a little bit. So this is a totally different approach, but also a good job. And so this is another student example. I'll also mention, you can see that the students don't all use TikTok, they use various videos, and so not video softwares, and so not all the videos are vertical, some of them are normal YouTube shape, and so I don't put any restrictions at all onto what softwares the students want to use. And in fact, I've had some students who specifically don't want to use TikTok for sort of various political reasons. Okay, let's take a look at the example.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Maya Aird, and you're watching Chasing Tides. Tonight, we dive deep into the world of underwater volcanoes and the tsunamis they spawn. A groundbreaking study has uncovered a hidden danger lurking beneath the waves, a sweet spot where underwater eruptions could trigger the most devastating tsunamis. The study reveals that certain water depths can amplify the destructive power of these underwater explosions, potentially reshaping our understanding of coastal hazards. Stay with us as we dive into how this discovery could revolutionize our understanding of tsunami prediction and potentially save countless lives in the future. We begin with a team of international scientists led by researchers from New Zealand, including Yakshin Shin and Colin Whittaker. The team's findings were published in the prestigious Journal of Geophysical Research in 2021. This collaborative effort, which also included experts Emily Lane, James White, William Power, and Farofsky Namenkow, has shed new light on the complex relationship between underwater volcanic eruptions and tsunami generation. Using a novel concept called effective scaled water depth, the team of scientists has categorized underwater eruptions into 3 dramatic types. Shallow water, where the volcano barely keeps its head below the surface. Intermediate water, the Goldilocks zone of underwater eruptions. Deep water, where the pressure's on and the waves are off the charts. But that's not all. The scientists have even pinpointed a critical depth where wave generation reaches its peak. Talk about making waves in the scientific community. But what sparked this groundbreaking research? According to our sources, the scientists were driven by a perfect storm of concerns. The looming threat of submarine volcanoes unleashing devastating tsunamis on unsuspecting coastal communities, a glaring gap in our understanding of how these underwater infernos birth monstrous waves, an urgent need to upgrade our hazard assessment tool, and a burning question. How do the volcano's fury and the ocean's depth conspire to create these watery behemoths? These pressing issues set the stage for a series of high-stakes laboratory experiments designed to unlock the secrets of underwater eruptions and their tsunami-generating potential. Let's check in with our expert, Maya Arid, for a deeper dive on this. These scientists behind this study didn't just make waves. They created them in the lab. Here's how they dove into their research. They set up a glass tank with an underwater air injection system.
Okay, so I'm going to stop it there. But this student obviously took a very creative approach and developed actually two sort of characters or personas to discuss the science. They had a newscaster, sort of tongue-in-cheek Colbert Report kind of character. And then when I saw this the first time, I laughed really hard when she comes onto the screen in the scientist outfit after the fact, so doing the two characters. And you can see, again, this was well structured to address all these questions, and she took sort of a comedic, satirical spin on it in this case. And I'm only showing two examples here. I could go on and show lots of students did very creative things. Some students did at-home experiments with the ice cubes and stirring up sediment, and many students have actually done homemade experiments. And so there's lots and lots of room to sort of express yourself and be creative while also exploring the core science thoroughly. Okay, so what do the students think about this project? Do they like it? Do they have fun? So every year, I don't really use the CEQs very much, but I put together my own polls. And so for the past two times I've done this, I've done polls, and I'm just showing the results from last year. We had about 2/3 of the students responding, and the results are very, very similar across the two times that I've done this project. So the first question I asked is, overall, do you think the TikTok project was a valuable educational experience? Students overwhelmingly, 80%, say that it is. A key part of it that's actually, a lot of the work on my end is the feedback. And so I want to know, is that educationally valuable? So is the two-draft format valuable? Did incorporating the feedback help you to strengthen your communication skills? And not 90% said yes in this case. And I think that I was very happy with that because, something that I think everyone struggles with when they're first learning, and I certainly remember that I struggled with it a lot, is when you're reading a scientific paper, like what's the important stuff and what's just the details that you don't need to know. And so that's where the feedback can really help. Say, okay, this is really a detail that's not central. Maybe you can de-emphasize that and spend more time on the central, like most important figure or most important two figures. And so I was very happy to see that the students agreed. And then I asked straight up, would you rather do a term paper or would you rather do this video project? And essentially everybody in this case either wanted to do the video project or they didn't care. So in general, and this is the majority of the students responded to this poll, and in general have a pretty positive experience. So how about some of the specific comments? So this is just sort of a cherry pick of some comments. These are just written comments. And so they say it's a lot of fun. They liked the mandatory fun watch party. One of my favorite parts of the course. I was really happy with this comment where someone says that they really liked the video project because they find the in-class presentations maybe too nerve-wracking, and they liked the draft setup so that they could really feel confident in their final draft, and it sort of had been vetted, and they knew the presentation was good before it got shown to other people. And another student says that their anxiety was less bad than they thought it would be. So I was very happy, of course, with these comments. One person says, interesting, and it's something I thought about quite a bit. So one person says, I think peer feedback would be beneficial for both the giver and the receiver, as it allows students to reflect on an example that isn't their own. And so I took that and I actually asked the students directly what they thought of including a peer feedback component. This is also something that could alleviate some of the grading pressure. But this really got a negative response. So I asked, this is, I think, from a previous year, maybe. See if So I said, this is from both years. And so from both years, I asked the same question, would the video project benefit from a peer feedback component? And the majority, 60% of students are saying they would be uncomfortable having another student review my video. And you can sort of imagine why that would be, you have sort of close-up video of yourself for several minutes talking, and maybe someone will be uncomfortable having someone sort of critically analyze that. So in general, students are quite uncomfortable with having peer feedback on an assignment of this type. But there are a small number of students who actually would really say that they like it a lot. So I've decided not to implement peer feedback based on this feedback from students, but it's an idea that could be considered. Okay, so how about the critical feedback? So students also gave some more critical comments, and so these are some examples. And one key one is that if several students say more examples would have been great. And I think this is, especially the first 2 times I taught the course, I think I didn't do a good enough job showing examples from previous years. Of course, the first time I taught it, I had no examples, but I could have also shown examples from YouTube or something like that, and I didn't show very many, if any. And so many students kind of didn't know exactly how to do it, or there was too much freedom, and they weren't sure how to get started. And so I think if you were going to adopt this approach in your teaching, definitely supplying some examples that give students some baseline to go off of would be very valuable. Some students still said anxiety is an issue, so they're just uncomfortable having people looking at them up in front of class. That's understandable. And then another thing that I got some criticism for, which was definitely appropriate, was that I've occasionally been behind on marking. It's happened in my life once or twice, and giving individual feedback on the draft, I think that's very important. But of course, we all have many things on our plate, and grant proposals being due in the middle of the semester and so forth. And so occasionally I was a bit late on the feedback, and that caused the schedule to get a little bit crammed up. And so I think if you are going to supply feedback into a draft system, it's important to somehow manage your time or plan things out in such a way that you can get the feedback out in a prompt way. And actually, what I'm experimenting with this year is I've found sometimes the grading is a bit much, and so what I'm experimenting with this year for the first time is getting the students to do this in groups of 2, which in principle should half the number of projects. It also opens up the door to doing things like having a conversational structure or doing it in the form of a short podcast clip. There's lots of different options that one could explore. Okay, so that's the end of my talk. If anybody wants to see the course on which this where we're doing this, it's all available on YouTube. This is my YouTube page where all the lectures are posted. I'd be happy to discuss this topic or teaching in general. If anybody wants to reach out to me, my email is right there, jgfitzgerald@mun.ca. If you're interested in the various little cartoons that are populated throughout this talk, I've recently learned from students that there's this website called Canva where you can just type in, I want to, this is a salt crystal wearing a pirate hat. And the idea is that the salinity ions in the ocean, they move all around the ocean. So they're explorers. So I made this using this Canva website in less than 5 minutes. And so if you're looking for little cutesy little things like that to spice up your lectures, you have a slot on a slide where you have no good figure to put in. I use this tool all the time now.